everybody, we are here with Gena Lester, and I am so excited to be here because this is such a big issue and brings so much stress to people, this transition. And as people learn more about what you do, I think they'll understand what I'm talking about. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yes. So I am an independent educational consultant and I work with families that are going through the college admissions process. And so I have a kind of double background in that I have education, and obviously I've ran private schools. I've been a counselor. I've worked with independent families, but I also have a psychology background. And I bring that into my practice a lot because I feel like that when you're going through this process as a parent or a teen, there is a lot of stress, a lot of emotion. A lot of times students, this is the first time they've ever had a real rejection or a no or that kind of huge disappointment for something they really wanted. Parents, we want our kids to be successful, so we get anxious and nervous about that. And so, I always joke that, my job is half working with kids getting college and half talking parents and kids off the ledge. So there is definitely that emotional component that goes with it. And, I see so many kids now that have anxiety and, depression, and they're just feeling overwhelmed and they just shut down in the middle of the process. And so I do a combined program where I work and help those kids overcome those issues as well.
Hmm. That's awesome. You mentioned that, yeah, a lot of kids have depression and anxiety, and I love what you mentioned about the fear of being rejected.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can impact so many kids in so many different ways. In your work, how have you experienced that this has impacted maybe some of your clients? As much as you can share that
Yeah.
rejection really hit them hard.
Yeah, and I think I see kids that they come from various different backgrounds. So I have some of these kids are really high achievers, and they really work really hard because they're just striving for that next thing. And I remember a few years ago I had a student that was this really high achiever, and he had gotten accepted to quite a few schools that were even Ivy level. But he had one school that he had really had his heart on, and he got into the school, but not into the major he wanted. And I remember him texting me at 9 o'clock at night. I could tell it was a moment of I need to talk to this kid now. It doesn't matter. And so I, got on the phone, and, his first response was, it's over. I'm not, I didn't get into the major. Life is coming to an end. I'm not even going to go to college, blah, 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 And now, obviously, after we've talked through that, we talked about how to deal with those emotions and to let them go through it. And so we, let him walk through dealing with that. And that's okay. And now he's getting ready to graduate. He's very successful, all of those things. So I have that kind of student, but then also have students that come from families that have high expectations. And so there is a cultural kind of back that goes underneath that, where the families or the grandparents or the extended families or their culture has a high expectation on the student. And then if they aren't living up to that, or they don't get accepted, or something happens, they internalize that so much because it's like they've lost face, or they haven't they've let their family down. And so dealing with that piece of it. And then you have the underachievers who are, their parents just want them to get into college, and they're feeling that anxiety and stress because they're dealing with a learning difference, or they're not as organized, or just all of those things. So it comes from various, different areas, truthfully.
Hmm. You mentioned a couple of things that were interesting. The first thing is expectations.
Mm-hmm.
There is a couple of studies. One study that I read that was super interesting. They gave kids in a classroom, I think it was 100 kids, but they gave half the kids all the kids would have to write an essay, and then half the kids they gave the essay back with the corrections,
Hmm.
and then like submit, submit for review or something, like submit it back.
Hmm.
That's what they said. And then the other half of the kids, they said, with a sticky note, personal written from the teacher. He said, turn it back in. I'm writing you these notes and all of these errors because I expect that you can do so much better, and I expect highly things of you, something like that. And in the second group, I think it was like 70% of the kids returned the paper for revisions. And in the first group, the group that didn't have the sticky note, only like 30% of the kids returned the paper for revisions. And
Yep.
so it's incredible how expectations have so much impact and influence in kids
Yep.
and in ourselves, but also it's like a double-edged sword, right? And
Yes.
so at
Hmm.
what point have you noticed that this also helps, but also it can be pretty harmful too for the psychology of the kids?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it is a double-edged sword because, having expectations is a good thing. It's good to say, okay, this is a school that I'm looking forward to and I want to get in, and I'm going to work hard and I'm going to put my, expectations in that direction, or that I'm expected to do well in school, or expected to get my homework done, all of those things. But where it becomes a issue is when that expectation um, becomes so embedded in them that it's not really an expectation. It's that they look at it, they can never achieve, they can never be good enough, they're never going to meet that expectation. And the reality is that we all, set expectations or goals for ourselves, and sometimes we obtain those and sometimes we don't. And we can't internalize that and make it about who we are as a person versus the outcome of just the situation. So, that, I think that's where the I guess the issue becomes, is that when it becomes if you don't meet that expectation, then you then are a lesser, you look at yourself lesser, you view yourself, or you feel like that people are looking at you lesser, or that you're never going to meet an expectation. And you begin to go down that rabbit hole of negativity, that then adds in that extra stress, that extra pressure, can open up for depression, all of those things.
Yeah, and it seems like there is like in that moment they can be almost like the fixed mindset where
Hmm.
okay, that's it, like this is me, I can't do it, right?
Right.
Or the growth mind that is like, oh, this is actually gonna make me better because I can learn something from it. And so how do you like when that kid called you, or young adult, young man called you, how did you kind of walk him through it? What was
Hmm.
some of the techniques or some of the philosophy that you use
Yeah.
to walk them through
Well,
it?
and I think first of all is, I when I start working with the student, I try to set the expectation that there's going to be disappointment up front. Um, and so I think that that's a big part of it, to understand that, with the students, I let them know, okay, so you may apply to 10 schools, and let's say you only get into 7 of those schools. So instead of looking at the fact that you had these, schools that rejected you, you have 7 schools. So now you are the one that's going to be rejecting 6 of those because you can only go to 1 school. So when I try to begin with that point of realizing that it is a give and take. You're applying to 10 schools. You're not going to go to 10 schools. You're going to get into some schools. You may not get into others. And it's really about finding a school that's really the right fit, where you are going to thrive. And ultimately, in the end, the kids always come back, even if it's a school that they really wanted to get into and they didn't, and they get in somewhere else, they realize this was a better choice for me anyway. But with this particular student, what I did was I pulled him back. At that moment he was so emotional that there wasn't anything I could say at that moment that was going to fix it. And so, what I basically did was I gave him permission to grieve. because he needed to do that. I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Don't think about submitting anything else. Don't think about whether, we're not going to go, oh, but look at all these great options. At this moment, you are really honestly feeling this deep. And so we have to acknowledge that, and we have to grieve that, and we have to accept it. And then, I gave him, I kind of checked in with them. I'm like, you take this week and you just let this settle, and you go through, if you need to cry, if you need to go run and get that, because you get, obviously in grief, you go through stages. Well, you go through similar stages when in that disappointment, not to the same extent, but you have that. So we went through that week of like, okay, accepting, grieving, letting go. And then we were able to take a step back and look and say, okay, let's look at this. You still got into the school and they offered you this major. So even though it wasn't, and it was a business major he was going into, so it was still in the same, they offered him a different business major. So, you still have the opportunity to be at this school if that's really where you want to be. And let's look at how this degree can ultimately take you where you need to be. Or do we want to look at one of these other schools? So then we began to evaluate, look at, and those type of things. And ultimately he decided to go with the school that he wanted to begin with the second choice degree, because the second choice degree really would lead him to the same outcome. So a lot of times they don't realize that. But if I had tried to say that to him in that moment, it would have been, he wouldn't have heard it, and so you have to let them walk through that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're so right. One of the times, actually pretty recently, I was going through a kind of a rough patch for a
Mm-hmm.
couple of days. It was tough. And then one of my friends says, don't hold it back, don't
Mm-hmm.
hold back. And when I spoke to many people, people sometimes don't know what to say. And I thought those words were so good because,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's like that moment is for just not holding back, right? Like just
Yes.
let it
Mm-hmm.
out, just don't hold back. And you're so right. Like a lot of times we try to be like, I've made this mistake so many times, like putting, my foot in my mouth, I guess, for lack of a
Yes.
better words. Like you say something trying to help, but they're not. This is not the moment to try to help. It's just being there
No.
with them. I
Yeah.
think one time I read a book about toddlers, and we had our niece, and just being with them. It talks about like being with them through a tantrum or through
Mm-hmm.
just a really hard time, because for them it's a really hard time. Their little
Mm-hmm.
hearts are broken, they're feeling grief for some reason, and just being in the room, you don't have to leave, and just being with them
Mm-hmm.
through it until they calm down, they find a safe place, they realize that that's okay, that feeling that those emotions is okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of our society is that, and as humans, we feel empathy and we want to fix the situation. And so when we see somebody hurting, or we see a situation or whatever it is they're going through, we want to immediately jump in and fix it. And sometimes we can't, and it doesn't need to be fixed at that moment. It's just that they have to deal with that moment at that moment. And once they kind of get past that emotional reaction of whether it's anger or frustration or disappointment or whatever, then they're going to be okay. I tell parents all the times, and one of the conversations I have up front is that when your students are these letters are going to come, they come via email or sometimes they come in the mail. Talk about this up front. How does your student want to get the information? Do they want to open the letter in front of you? You see these like I got accepted videos where people are videotaping themselves and they're all jumping up and down screaming, I got accepted. But what you don't realize is that there are thousands of kids that made those same videos that didn't get accepted, and it never gets posted because it was a disappointment. They didn't get in. And so how does your student need to deal with this? Do they want, I have, 3 kids of my own. My youngest daughter she needs to process. So for her, she wanted her letters. She wanted to go to her room and she wanted to open them privately. And she wanted to either get excited or feel that disappointment on her own for a few minutes and then come and tell me. And as a parent, you're like, please tell me, I want to know, but at the same time, we have to realize that our kids are, they're processing too, as much as we. So when you're talking about this in up front, then it makes things a whole lot easier in the process. So, it's really setting those expectations and talking about it all from the beginning.
Yeah, I think because we put so much pressure on them, we
Hmm.
put so much pressure on them that we can not allow them the space they need to do their own thing, and so yeah,
Hmm.
and I have a teenager too, and yeah, definitely that can be so much, and we have to be so mindful about that, because I got to
Yes.
catch myself all the time, and I'm sure I miss some of the times that I'm putting my stuff onto her, my expectations, how I deal with things onto
Yes.
her. And tell me something, why was it that you made the transition from teacher, you run schools also, and then what made you say, like, you know what, I'm gonna help kids do this?
Yeah. So originally, I started out in education, and I actually started a school back in the 80s. It was kind of a hybrid school for students that were homeschooled, because in Texas, we had a pretty good sized homeschool community, but this was pre all of the there's lots of co-ops and things like that. There was really nothing. So I set up a school that was kind of a college, similar to college, where they could take classes, and they were homeschooled, but they would come and choose classes and take those classes. And we stopped at 8th grade, because once they start their that transcript, that becomes an important part. But I would also do a lot of counseling with kids in the academic area, as far as going into high school and those next steps. And my story is kind of interesting in that when I got married fairly young. My husband was we were high school sweethearts, and at 35, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. So he was a very young Parkinson's patient. And yeah, and so, he was an engineer, brilliant man. We had 3 kids. But by the time he was in his 40s, he was, late 40s, he was not able to work. So I realized early on, okay, my life is going to look very different than what I had anticipated. And I loved working with the kids. So I ended up going back to school in my early 30s. So I encourage people, if they're, it's never too late to go back and do what you want to do. And so I ended up getting my PhD, my doctorates, all of those things while he was dealing with Parkinson's, and I was still kind of running a school, those type of things. And then when it got to the point that I needed to come home and be a caregiver, I was like, I can't just sit home and do nothing. And how am I going to provide? And what is all of this going to look like? And how do I take care of him? And so forth. And so people began asking me just generally, like, can you help us? We'll pay you. Can we come work with you one-on-one? And so that's how my business was actually born, was through caregiving for him. And it gave me the flexibility to have a small clientele, work with those students, still have interaction, have my own kind of thing, and build my business. He did eventually pass away, and I'm now remarried, and my husband and I are both widows. So had gone through this similar thing. We have 6 kids between us, so we joke that we're the Brady Bunch, and that type of thing. But yeah, so it was through all of that, the transition of him becoming ill, me going back to school, and I loved the psychology end. So I pulled in the psychology, and I actually have a double master's in IO psychology and higher education. And so, and then my PhD is actually Christian psychology. So yeah, so I, pulled in all of those things together, and I just felt like they fit, and so I've always worked with children, I love working with kids, and I just see, especially in today's world, how much and how so many things in our society are affecting them, and all the pressures. I think our kids have way more pressures than I did when I was a kid, for sure. And, just helping them navigate those, and knowing that this is more of a all-encompassing process. It's not just oh, we're going to fill out an application.
Hmm. Oh,
Yeah.
so much I want to talk to you about. So many
Yes.
interesting things. You know, there's a guy who wrote a book called "Business is My Higher Calling."
Mm-hmm.
Business is my highest calling,
Yes.
and what you're saying is exactly what happens. It's like this combination of having to, you needed to provide for your family, and
Mm-hmm.
then this combination of this need that the world has from what you have to offer. And
Yep.
then when that meets together, where you're reimbursed healthy for what
Yes.
you're doing, and then you also get to do like your purpose, and then you're also
Mm-hmm.
get taking care of your husband, like everything gets
Yes.
tied together. And I think that's really like that calling, that higher calling.
Yep.
So I love that story. And then the other thing that you mentioned um, was about your school. And that was so interesting that you started a school that was hybrid. Our
Mm-hmm.
our daughter actually, when we took 2 years to travel all over the world, and
Uh-huh.
so we put her on online school.
Yep.
It was like I think it was I forget the name, something academy, Connections Academy, something like
Yep.
this.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, and it was an international online school, but it was great.
Yep.
But the social aspect of it is missing, and it was
Yep.
quite hard. And so I think that that school that you started was so useful.
Mm-hmm.
And also, right now during COVID, how much you see, like when she's been at home so much, we've had
Yep.
such a good time, and you spend so much time together. So you just wonder, our schools really serving our kids the best, and then
Yep.
is college serving our young adults the best? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely think COVID is opening up a whole new can of worms for
It's
education.
everything.
Yes, and while there are definitely lots of negatives about dealing with it at the moment, I think one of the positives is that it is bringing us back as families and individuals to reconnect and to slow down, because I feel like that the social aspect, which is wonderful. I mean, my daughter was in theater and choir and all those things, and had a great social base, but it was like go, 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 go all the time. My son played sports. It was go, 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 go all the time. And so when it's that type of situation, the times to sit down and play a game or have a family meal get lost. It's not that you don't want to do those, it just gets lost because of such busyness. So I do think that in some respects it's made things a lot better, in that it's kind of brought us back to that and have fun, and we create more events and more connections in that respect. I think that the online learning has some good aspects to it, in that the kids are getting the work done. They're not, they're seeing, I can get this done and really learn in a certain amount of time versus being there for 8 hours. On the opposite end, I do think that social aspect is important, because without it, especially for our kids that are extreme extroverts, then they're really missing that. And that can cause that depression. It can cause those anxieties. It can cause that, like, just frustrations. And then the kids that are already introverts, it's causing them to be more introverted. So that part is a little on the negative side. And so, finding a balance between what can we do online versus can we still have that social aspect? Can we still provide, those fun activities like prom and homecomings and sports and theater shows and all of those things? Is there a way to still have that social, but provide I guess a different or an alternative learning style for our kids? I do think when you look at the colleges, one of the things that people pay for when their students are going to college is, beyond the education, is the social experience. They're looking like, what does the gym look like? Do they have a sports teams? Do they have sororities? Do they have activities? Like, what is that environment going to be? And it's a safe place for our kids, or we look at it as a safe place for our kids to transition out of our homes. So they go from our homes into a dorm where they're living on their own. They have their own, they're setting and being self-responsible, but yet they're still in a kind of a safe cocoon area, I guess, so that you're not just throwing them out into an apartment, into the world, figuring it all out on their own. So it's kind of a step from one thing to another. And I've seen like Carnegie Mellon this year, one of what they did is they had the kids choose whether they wanted to be on campus their fall or the spring. So the kids in the fall went in the fall and they're in dorms, and they each have their own, I think, rooms. I mean, they spread them out. But their classes are about 85 to 90% online. And then the classes that are like art based, or, labs, or things that you are more difficult to do online, because I think it's hard to do a lab online. First of all, the kids don't have the resources in their homes to do those labs. So those classes, they're going in person. So classes that require them to use equipment, things to that effect. And then the other they're doing in their dorm. And then the spring, those kids will move into an apartment and continue that same regiment. So, I don't know that I think that the traditional college will go away, because I feel like that there is still that experience that parents and kids are looking for. But I think that we're going to see more adjusting, if that makes sense. We will see kids taking more classes online that can be, because they're learning how to learn online. And so I think we're going to see more of a hybrid, of some online, some in person, still having that connection, making friends, that kind of rite of passage.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right. And I think what's happening now is that, yeah, kids are, the relationship they built in high school, then they're able to, they stay connected and they get together, all of
Uh-huh.
this, and then they go online for the classes. That's what's kind of happening from our own experience, which is pretty
Yes.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that's interesting is, whenever you leaped into a business owner and helping these kids, how do you think schools and colleges are kind of helping kids? Because many times this is the same thing that happens, right? Kids go to school and then they get a career and then they realize, like, wow, like I need to do something more. There is a bigger calling. And do you think there is like already um, fast tracks maybe into being able just to get them there? Or do you feel like college is really, I mean, I get what you're saying from the perspective of the relationships, the
Yes.
experience. I mean, that's invaluable for me too.
Right.
Some of my greatest friends are from medical school, from college, and so
Right.
I think that's great. um, do you think schools, I guess my question is, do you think schools are starting to incorporate those things, like the entrepreneurship, the following
Mhm.
calling, into the education and the framework that they're taking kids through?
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of back up into the high school area. So one of the things that I do with students, because I agree, I think finding your calling, finding your passion, knowing where, what that higher calling is. And once you get there, like you're excited in business, I can tell you, as much as I love my business, there are things that I don't enjoy doing. I'm like, "Ugh, I have to do this piece of it because it's just part of it." But 99% of it I love. And it's because I'm in my passion. I'm doing what I'm really called to do. So I have a program that I call Uniquely You, where I really help those kids figure out what it is and where their passions are. So if they're a student that's like wanting to go to medical school, then we're going to make sure that they're setting themselves up for success to get into the right programs going forward. And then within the colleges now, we have a lot of they're very competitive, but we have programs where kids can go in, and it's kind of like a fast track. So they're spending 3 years getting their undergrad, and then they're going straight into, they're already connected into the medical school going forward. We are seeing entrepreneurship. That's a new, definitely a big major that's coming up. So for me, when I'm working with a student, if I see that that's that student's gift, if that's an aptitude, that's where they're headed, then I, encourage them, go out and start a business now. Then when you go into it, think about college. If you're going down your own business, Do you want to be in entrepreneurship? Do you want to be in marketing? Do you need to learn? What is it that you need to learn to be able to really be successful? And a lot of times kids think, oh, I have to go into biology if I'm going to be a doctor, or I have to go into economics or pre-law if I'm going to be a lawyer, or I have to go in, if I want to work in business, I have to go into management. And that's just really not true. It's really more about finding a degree that's going to allow you to do what you want to do ultimately in your life. I mean, obviously, most people don't pull in psychology and education. They'll go one or the other ways. Um, and so for me, it was like, okay, I have a passion and a care for both of these things, and I'm able to marry them together. And with kids coming out of schools with AP credits and dual credits, and I think we're going to see even more of that, they're going into college already at a sophomore plus level technically in education. So sure, they can get through with their degree faster, but why not look at doing a double degree? And you typically only apply to one. And I tell the kids, you know, you're going into one major, but when you're there, then you know that you can pull in this other area. Or you can go and take, even if you're not getting a degree, sometimes it's not about the degree, it's about what classes can you pull in that are going to complement what you're doing, so that when you're through, you're able to really be more well-rounded and be successful going forward.
Hmm, that's really great. That's a great way to look at it and to think about it, and for kids to use it. Okay, what's my what they call like just in time learning is a little bit different. That
Yes.
okay, what I need to do and what's the next step I need to learn to get there. But you use
Yep.
college like that, kind of like long term scale a little bit
Uh-huh.
more. Tell me a little bit about your PhD on Christian psychology.
Uh-huh.
What was that like?
It's really fun. I love psychology. And so I have both business psychology and, the traditional Christian psychology. And I, I love understanding people. I love understanding the mind and knowing how all of those things work together. And I realize, that whether you're a student going through the college admissions process or you're an adult who is trying to make that shift into life, then there are roadblocks and mental mindsets and things that keep us from moving forward into those things. And obviously for me, going through it through the Christian aspect, I tie that in to my psychology when I'm working with certain families and things like that. I mean, I work with students from all cultures and all backgrounds and have various religious backgrounds as well, and so I always respect all of that. But I definitely think that there's more beyond just what we see in our mind, like getting through those mindsets, getting through those breakthroughs and things in our life. We have to be able to lean on things that are beyond our understanding sometimes, and trusting that we're able to pray through something, or to know that if as a Christian there's a scripture that I'm going to stand on that's going to help me get that breakthrough as I move forward. And so I think all of those things are really important in that process. Now in going through psychology, it's a pretty broad field, and I definitely learned a lot about different addictions and things to that effect. And that's like really not necessarily what I feel called into working with, like families or that have addictions within their families. But at the same time, it is definitely something that we see happening a lot, even in the Christian world or in the secular world, either way.
Hmm. That's so interesting. With this whole thing with the movements, with what
Uh-huh.
COVID has also played a big part of, when when we watch these men die on a screen, and then
Yes.
this whole ripple effect happened. I
Yes.
was thinking back at the story of, of Jesus, and I was wondering,
Hmm.
wow, like, yeah, the death of one man. I mean, and of course, there is more philosophical and of
Right.
course, belief system behind so many other aspects of it. But just in our physical world, as human beings, as we're experiencing this world right now, like, wow, the death of one man could cause such a ripple effect around the
Yes.
world. Um, that was very interesting. And what was some of your biggest insights whenever you were doing your deep studies into the Christian psychology that
Hmm.
I'm sure trickle in into what you do every day?
Yeah, well, and I think one of the big things, I look at right now is there's a lot of fear. A lot of young people have a lot of fear. Um, you think about from 9/11 all the way to now, there has just been a continual amount of things that have happened that have caused our young people to experience and feel fearful about what the next step is. And so for me, definitely as a Christian, when I'm working with these kids or with anybody, and there's that fear that's there, that's really strong, and they're trying to get over that, being able to speak to them and give them, whether it's a scripture or some, ways to be able to stand and pray and walk through that. And instead of like looking at it as a fear, turning it into trust and to look at what we can do to keep moving forward, because it's real easy to be paralyzed with that fear. And then I think, as a going through into the Christian world and into Christian psychology, especially when I was going through it, a lot of times there was a kind of a negative, I guess, stigma on psychology, and like, oh, you only go to a counselor, if you're have these, like, you have to be crazy if you're going to talk to a counselor. And I feel like that has shifted from the time I went to school, which is really good. But honestly, we all go through situations and times and circumstances that we just need somebody to help us, like, look at the situation differently, to evaluate what is it that's causing that block, what is it that's keeping us from stepping out of that fear and into the business that we've always dreamed of, or being able to say, you know what, I've had these failures, but I'm not going to be defined by those failures. I'm going to allow these failures to help me be successful. And just knowing that when you're walking through something, that you can, you can call upon the Lord, you can stand, you can trust that things are going to, you're going to walk through them. They may not always come out the way you think they're going to. I mean, obviously I had prayed and stood for my husband to be healed, for him to be healed for some, whatever that looked like. And that didn't occur, that wasn't what was the plan. But I had a choice. I could either blame God or get angry or get stuck or just give up or all of those things. Or I could say, you know what, God, I know this was not what I had planned, but you have more for me. And so I'm going to keep moving forward, and I'm going to embrace all the things that you still have for me in my life. It doesn't take away the sadness or the hurt or any of those things, but you are able to move forward in a positive way. And so, for me, it's like sitting with a, rather, because I work with the kids, I love the kids, all of those things, but I also love working with adults who are in that transition time in their life where they're like, okay, I've been doing this. Nobody told me this. I went to school. I've been doing something I hate my whole life, or I feel like I missed out and I'm ready to make that transition. So how do I make that transition? And, for me, it's like, I love to help deal with those mindsets and help people really stay positive and move into whatever that is, whether it's to start a business, whether it is to just change careers, whether it's to go into retirement. There are some people who are afraid because they're so fearful that if they give up their job, that financially things are going to fall apart or whatever. So there's things that block us as adults, and we get into this place that we think, oh, we're too old to make a change. Well, I went back to school at 35 years old. I totally changed my life, at 35. And I finished my degrees in my 40s. So, it's definitely not ever too late, even if you're in your 40s or 50s and you're like, I want to make a change. If it's something, if it's a purpose and you're feeling called to that, like you said, that higher calling, it's not too late to make that impact. And it's like getting past that mindset.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. There was a study that was done on whether people how people look at what they do for a living, and they
Hmm.
showed that if they ask somebody that is laying a brick, what are you doing, and they say, I'm laying a brick, so
Hmm.
I'm a brick layer. And then if they ask the second person, what are you doing, and the second person said, I am building a church. And
Hmm.
then the third person, they ask him, okay, what are you doing, and they say, I'm building the house of God. And if
Hmm.
people listening, they're not religious, or they get the point, right? That bigger
Yes.
calling. And
Hmm.
they notice that the people who says that this is my calling, uh, that is the ones that says I'm building the house of God. The first ones have a job, and the second ones have a career. And so
Yes.
job, career, calling. And the ones that says calling, they have less sick days. They have
Yes.
more satisfaction with their jobs, and so it's so important to be able to do that. And you mentioned thriving, and so the word thriving, I talk a lot about the word thriving because I think is so important in the world. And there is surveys that have been done that put three people into three
Hmm.
categories: either struggling, suffering, or thriving.
Hmm.
And it's said about only 7% of the people are thriving in all categories of their lives, which is a
Hmm.
big gap. I mean, a lot of the
It
world
is.
is suffering. And then that loops me back right into what you said about that sometimes this tapping into something bigger than ourselves then allows you to be able to push through these harder times.
Yeah.
And the word thriving, what does the word thriving mean to you?
Thriving to me means that you are living in a place where you are happy, honestly. Thriving financially, it means that you have enough. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a millionaire, but at the same time, you're able to know that you have the means to do the things that you need to be doing to provide for your family, that you're happy in that, you're happy in your career, you're happy in with your family, with all of those things, and that God is literally, for me, the center of that, which keeps us. It doesn't mean that you're never going to have a sad moment or a hard moment, but it means that you are moving forward in like a positive direction. And I think that that is, you're right, there's so many people who are not in that place. They get stuck in these other places and their eyes are on the wrong things. And I think what you said a minute ago really clicked with me when you're talking about the bricklayer and stuff, because so many times we equate our job with like how successful we are and who we are and those things. And when somebody says, I mean, that's one of the first questions is like, oh, what do you do? Well, if you're equating yourself to a job, then you're never going to be more than that job. But if you're equating yourself to that higher calling, to what you're truly called to be doing, then it's not a job. It's no law, your identity is not that job. Your identity is this person who is going out and making a difference and has purpose in the world. And that's why my Uniquely You, and like I said, I do it with adults and kids and everything, is so important, because once you understand what makes you who you are, what makes you unique, makes you the person that you really are called to be, you're going to step into that calling. And once you step into that calling, and that doesn't have to mean that you're in the ministry, because that's what people tend to think. Oh, that means that I am strictly in the ministry. But like you said, I'm called. I'm called to business, or I'm called to whatever. And when you're there and you're happy, then you're thriving in a positive way, because no matter what comes against you, you're in the palm of the Lord's hands. And this is from my perspective, that you're in that center, and that you are you're in the right place. So you, even in the difficult times, even when I lost my husband, even in those sad moments of, feeling even that loss, I knew that I was in the right place and that I was going to keep moving forward.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so true. That keeping moving forward. One of the books that comes to my mind when you're talking about that is this book called "Man's Search for Meaning" by
Uh-huh.
Viktor Frankl. I don't know
Yes. Hmm.
yeah, I mean that book, and that's the whole thing, right? Like it doesn't really matter what happens to us in the tragedy. That there is, if we find a meaning with a renewed sense of purpose,
Right.
then it would actually that place of suffering could actually be taking us into another place that's better, and so
Yep.
and tell us a little bit about your book.
Yes. So I just wrote my first book, which was really exciting. And it is it's basically your college admission secrets, and it's a game plan for success. So that's pretty exciting. And so basically, I take you step by step through the college admissions process. So if you have a student and you're getting ready to go in the college process, I share some stories in there, and I give you a plan to go forward step by step, which is pretty cool because then it just helps you understand people's, the biggest question I get asked all the time or parents say to me is that we just don't know what we don't know. And especially right now, everything is just like every day is something new. So you definitely don't know what you don't know. And so this gives people at least a guide. It gives them the basis to be able to walk through each step of the way so that they're able to at least have a higher understanding of the process, what they're looking for, where their students going, and those type of things.
Hmm. That's so great. And then through this time, what was some of the hardest times that you had to go back to that place where you had to say, I need to keep moving, or where you had doubt that that was even possible? Was there some of those times?
Yeah, and you're talking about in my business in general.
Yeah,
Well,
business
yeah,
or life, whatever comes to your
yeah.
mind. Yeah.
Well, obviously, um, walking through the situation with my husband, that was a big moment of like, and people would tell me and say, oh, my family has, and my extended family, his family had did real estate. They did a lot of real estate. And so people would say, oh, you'd be so good in real estate. You should do this. And I was like, it doesn't matter if I'm good at it. It's not what I'm called to do. Definitely, stepping out, starting that business, those type of things. But even in the business, there are moments that I feel like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. I'm tired, or is do I keep going? And that's just the enemy coming in trying to keep me from stepping into, keep fulfilling my purpose. And so, sometimes it's like that renewing of the mind. You just have to stop and take a break and let your mind get renewed and focus on the things that you're supposed to focus on. And then, as soon as a moment that pops into my head, I immediately think of all of my success stories, all the kids, where they're at, where their families are at, all of those connections. And I immediately think, no, I am touching a generation. And that is what my calling is. And I think that's the biggest thing. When you know your calling and you're in that calling, then no matter how many times you get tired or you're worried about, is that next client going to be there, or what's going to happen in this situation, or you're going through a difficult time, you immediately know, I'm in my calling, so this is where I'm supposed to be. And that helps you just keep moving forward.
Hmm. That's so true.
Mm-hmm.
That's so true. When you say I'm in my calling, in a book called Grit, I think she talks about
Mm-hmm.
having that high level calling that is
Yep.
like one encompassing, like for me, is helping humans thrive. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like whatever I do, it can tie to that in so many different ways. And
Yes.
whatever failure I have is like, okay, well, the lesson from this, does it help me get there? And yeah,
Yep.
it does, half the time, because then you can connect with people better that have gone through the same things.
Uh-huh.
and so on. What are some of the biggest satisfactions that you've had working with, some of the success stories or really the stories that you're proud about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I see the kids' eyes light up when they get that acceptance letter, when they get those scholarship dollars, seeing them be successful, and I'm very connected. That's one of my like core values is connectedness, and so I stay connected with these kids. I mean, I watch them get married and have babies, and so that's it. That part right there is like a huge success for me. This year I had, or last year I had a student that had very severe learning differences and was borderline on the autism scale, and had low test scores but had decent GPA and things. And when they came to me, they, like, both the parent and the student were just, I could see the hopelessness in their eyes. And we talked about, because they were like, he wanted to go to college, but how was that going to look? And so I was able to really help them find a list and build out colleges that he could be successful at, and that he could see that happen. And so he applied to like 12 schools and got into 10 of them. Yeah. And with a test score that most schools you would think wouldn't happen, but because we showed what made him unique, we showed all of these positive things about him in spite of the what the GPA was. And he looked at me and he had tears in his eyes, and he just said, I thought I was not going to go to college. I thought this could not be a reality. And not only was it a reality, but he had choices, and they were able to find the school that was right for him, that's going to help him when he graduates get a job and be successful as an adult, even with a disability. And so those stories make me just as excited as the student who gets into their number one dream school, that's that Ivy kid. And so I have a very wide variety of kids. I work with kids that are high achieving. I work with kids that are in the middle, that have kids that have learning differences. And it's all about them finding their passion and knowing and understanding themselves, so that they're able to step out and really be successful. Because ultimately, whether you are on the scale, or whether you're a high achieving, you're going to be a CEO, if you're in your true calling, if you find your passion, if you understand where your core values, what your aptitudes, what things make you who you are, then you're going to be happy in life, even during the difficult times.
Hmm.
Because we know that we're going to have difficult times. Money doesn't take away all of the hard times. We tend to think if only I had this, if only there were that, then that's going to make life so much better. But we live in a world that is going to throw things at us, and we're going to go through those ups and downs. And
Hmm.
when you're in your calling, that's when you're thriving. That's when you're happy, even in the hard times.
That's so true. And that's why I love doing these interviews, because think about it. And let's say that this person would not come into contact with you, and then there was a
Mm-hmm.
Y in the road for him. A couple of years later, he's probably going to have more mental illness, beat
Mm-hmm.
himself up, start developing more chronic
Yes.
diseases, keeping going, keeping going. We're going to see him in the hospital, and he's going to become a part of, institution, in and out of hospitals, in and out of
Yep.
clinic, medications, full of medications. And then, you have this other path where he's in his calling, he feels on purpose, he has confidence,
Yes.
self-efficacy, it's amazing. And so, like, this impacts health outcomes in so many different ways in the
Yep.
well-being of our world. Um, tell One question that I wanted to ask you is your thoughts on, what do you think about the Richard Bransons that left school? What do you think about the Elon Musk that left school, the Mark Zuckerbergs that left school?
Mm-hmm.
These these college dropouts that are, in a lot of places, reminding us of, like, wow, like, there is not one way to skin the cat, right?
Yeah.
What are your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we have statistics that show, and we know that in most traditional settings, that a college degree, a student with a college degree financially will make $1 million plus more than a student without it. And a student that, or a person that doesn't have a degree, is going to struggle getting a job of any kind. So, there is that situation. But in saying that, I don't necessarily, I think you have to look at the individual. That's why you have to know what makes them unique, who they are, and what their calling is. Because, we have some kids that need to go to trade schools. We need electricians and plumbers and those type of things. So that is a form of education that is going to allow them to provide and make a living for their family. When you look at like the Zuckerbergs and the different ones you just mentioned, they all were true entrepreneurs. That's what their true, that was who they were. That was their internal makeup. That is not every person's internal makeup. There are people who think, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur, I could be an entrepreneur, whatever, but maybe that's not really their true internal makeup, their true calling. And I think all of those people would talk about the risks that they've gone through. Most all of them have, rose to the top, fallen to the bottom, and rose to the top again, those type of things. And so there is that whole risk factor involved. So what is your risk tolerance? Are you able, and, can your marriage, can your family withhold you like being bankrupt and then coming back? And can you do that, and those type of things. But there are definitely, I agree, more than one way, as you said, to skin the cat. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's one path for anybody. And that's why when I'm not one of there are counselors that work with kids that are strictly wanting to go to Ivy schools. And I think an Ivy school is great for some kids. And there are some people that, yes, that is where they need to be. And I work with those kids that's their calling. But I don't think that's the right school for everybody. Even if they're an academic, top of the line student, it doesn't necessarily mean that school's right for them. We have kids that go to Harvard that end up not making any money. We have kids that go to a small college that nobody's ever heard of that ends up becoming a millionaire. So it's not always, the college does play into it. Your degree does play into it. All of those things can help in putting you on a path towards success. But it's really ultimately, what are you going to do? And what is your part in this? And then what is your next steps? And are you really stepping into your calling? So I think that's what you have to look at. And so if you have a child that really knows they're entrepreneurial, then they should be starting that in high school. Start doing things, starting their business, start a business. I worked with a girl a few years ago that started a nonprofit at 16. And by the time she graduated, she worked at a homeless shelter, and she saw somebody delivering some first aid kits, and they didn't have enough for all the homeless people. And so she thought, well, they don't even have basic Band-Aids. And so she started a nonprofit and was collecting medical, general, Band-Aids and antiseptic, things like that, for the homeless, and started creating these kits. And by the time she graduated, she was sending kits internationally to other countries. Yeah. Providing these just little mini, I guess, first aid kits. And so originally she thought she wanted to go in the medical field, and she felt this really calling. She was really bright. As we went through developing her uniquely you, all of those things, we realized, and she realized, that she was really called into the business world. And that for her, being in business, she could still affect and this nonprofit and various things and have an impact in the business world. But in the medical world, but from a different perspective. And so if she hadn't gone through all of these things, she wouldn't have known. She could have gone, she was bright enough to be a doctor without a doubt. But would she have been as happy as she is really going out, being a CEO or running her nonprofit or all of those things. So yeah, start early if that's what you think you're called to do.
Mm. Yeah, and I think you're so right. I think those there is insights that will accelerate
Mm-hmm.
our avenues a certain way. Like some of the people that I mentioned, they went to school for to even to college for a couple of semesters, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what got them to realize that no, I have to do something else. Or the word sacrifice, I think sometimes we think about giving something up, but it's giving something up for something better,
Yeah.
and so I completely agree with you. And what's next for you?
Right now, my business is growing, which is really exciting, and I've actually opened a what I call Accepted Academy, which is a kind of group hybrid coaching program. But going forward, one of the things that I'm looking at really adding into my business is a program that for adults who want to make change and bring in that uniquely you for them and talk about mindset from the psychology. We have a lot of programs that can teach you how to run Facebook ads and how to do marketing and how to do all of these things. And you need all of those things, believe me, when you're running a business. And I know you know this, there is a lot of things that are involved in it. But so many times we fail because we can't get past the mindset of it, and like the risk factors, and knowing, what is my true calling, because it's real easy, and especially as entrepreneurs, people, as we have these big ideas, and so we're like, oh, I can shoot here and I can shoot here and I can shoot here. But the reality is, for me, I could go out and teach you how to do a lot of different things in the business world because I've learned how to do marketing and all of those things, but that's not my calling. My calling is to help you or whoever really find what makes them unique, what makes them who they are, and how do they use those gifts and talents, and how do they break through the daily mindset of working alone. Because when you're an entrepreneur, so many times you're just by yourself and there's nobody to bounce off that moment of like disappointment and heartbreak and all of those things. So being able to bring all of that together. So that's, I think, the next addition to my business. I'm very excited about doing that. And I'm going to be looking at kicking that off in the next few months. So
That's so exciting because I think studies show like 70% of the people are unsatisfied with what they're doing. So
mm-hmm.
that's a huge pain point. But thank
Yeah.
you so much for being in the podcast, and I really appreciate it. And what a wonderful conversation. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna put pause here.